Emma could feel the tension in the air the moment she stepped into the house that evening. The walls seemed smaller, the shadows deeper, as if the rooms themselves were holding their breath. She hung her coat slowly, hoping it was just her imagination. But the feeling did not fade, it grew heavier with every step. Daniel had been distant all day, his messages short, his smiles forced, and now, with his cousins arriving for a visit, the house seemed to tighten around her. The familiar living room looked strange, the furniture oddly arranged, the quiet almost loud, and she sensed that tonight would not be ordinary. Mark and Lucas arrived with their usual easy charm, but there was something in their eyes that Emma couldn't place. Mark with his booming laugh and casual confidence, Lucas with his quieter observation. Both men seemed to be sizing her up in ways that made her skin crawl. Daniel greeted them with polite smiles, his words clipped, as if he wanted to stay on the surface of conversation, and Emma noticed the way he avoided looking at her, the way his eyes seemed fixed on some distant thought. She tried to tell herself that it was just family visiting, that she was being paranoid, that Daniel's cousins were harmless, but the pit in her stomach refused to be ignored. As the evening went on, Emma tried to keep herself busy, moving through the kitchen, preparing snacks, offering drinks, laughing when Mark made a joke, keeping conversation light, but she felt every glance, every lingering look, every small pause, like tiny weights pressing on her chest. She noticed Daniel heading toward the bedroom early, rubbing his eyes, claiming he was tired, and though he smiled at her when she said goodnight, there was a strange emptiness in that smile, an unreadable shadow in his calm tone. He laid down beside her and closed his eyes quickly, his breathing deep and steady, too steady, and Emma felt a small, gnawing fear. She wondered if she was imagining it, if the uneasy feeling was just stress. But then she caught Mark leaning too close when he laughed, Lucas watching her when she carried a tray to the table, and Daniel still silent, still motionless in the bedroom, pretending to sleep perhaps, or maybe lost in thought. Either way, he was not protecting her, not noticing the subtle ways his cousins were crossing invisible lines, and Emma felt a surge of confusion, anger, and sadness all at once. She pulled the blanket tighter around her, trying to calm the rapid beating of her heart, trying to convince herself that family was family, that nothing bad could happen here, yet the tension refused to leave. Hours passed. The sounds of the cousins' voices floating from the living room seemed louder in the quiet house, laughter too sharp, voices too intimate, and Emma realized that Daniel had not moved, had not checked in, had not even acknowledged the oddness of the night. She remembered the first time she noticed him like this, pretending not to see something important, pretending sleep could protect them both, and the memory made her chest ache. She wanted to shake him, to demand that he open his eyes, that he be present, that he act like the man she married, but she stayed still, trapped between disbelief and hope. Emma's mind raced, thinking of what she should do, whether she should confront him now or wait until morning, whether she was overreacting or whether the fear she felt was real. She remembered the small gestures that had always comforted her, the way Daniel used to notice the little things, the way he had once held her hand in the car just to remind her she was not alone. And now, in this house filled with family, she felt entirely alone. Her husband turned away, her heart unguarded, and the cousins moving through the house as if it were theirs. She tried to distract herself by tidying the kitchen, cleaning up the dishes, arranging glasses, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling, yet the feeling of being observed would not leave. The subtle tension in the air was like electricity, prickling her skin, making her want to flee, to escape the closeness that felt wrong, the attention that felt heavy, but she stayed, forcing polite smiles, soft laughter, trying to remind herself that it was just family, that Daniel was there, that he would protect her if it mattered. As she moved through the living room, she noticed small things that should have seemed trivial but now felt like warnings. Mark leaning a little too close when he laughed, Lucas's gaze lingering when she picked up a cup, the way Daniel's shoulders were turned toward the bedroom, his face hidden, his eyes closed, pretending to sleep, pretending not to see. and Emma felt the walls close in, the house suddenly too small, the night stretching long and uncertain. She realized that the quiet she expected from her husband was not comfort, it was silence in place of action, and it scared her more than any words could. Emma sat on the sofa for a moment, clutching a cushion to her chest, trying to breathe, trying to decide if she should leave the room, confront Daniel, or wait and see what unfolded. The cousins' voices hummed in the background, light and casual, masking the tension, and she felt trapped in the middle, between the husband who pretended sleep could solve problems and the cousins whose presence made her uneasy. Her thoughts tumbled, wondering how she had arrived at this moment, when the people she loved and trusted could feel so far away, so unrecognizable. Finally, exhaustion overtook her, but not sleep. She lay on the sofa, curling into herself, listening, waiting, unsure what the night would bring, the house full of people yet feeling empty. Daniel's slow breathing from the bedroom a constant reminder of what she feared, and as the hours passed, Emma understood that something fundamental had shifted. The trust she relied on, the safety she expected, was no longer guaranteed. The night stretched long, full of uncertainty and tension, and Emma knew that what she had once dismissed as imagination might be far closer to the truth than she wanted to admit. The morning came slowly, with a pale light filtering through the curtains, and Emma woke to a house that felt heavier than the night before. She rubbed her eyes, expecting to find comfort in Daniel's presence, but he was already awake, moving around the kitchen, humming softly, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. The normalcy of his movements made her chest tighten, because she knew deep down that something had shifted, that the invisible line of trust had been touched, and Daniel's silence had allowed it. He asked her if she had slept well, his voice calm, steady, almost casual, and Emma forced a small smile, answering politely, trying to hide the nervous flutter in her stomach. She felt herself searching his eyes for any sign of guilt, of awareness. But Daniel's face was composed, too composed, and that composure felt like a wall between them. She wanted to speak, to demand acknowledgement, but the words stuck, caught between fear and hope that he might just snap out of it, might just see what she had been feeling all night. The cousins lingered longer than expected, sitting at the breakfast table, laughing, teasing each other, and at times, including Emma in ways that made her uncomfortable, Mark commenting on her patience, Lucas remarking on her kindness. The compliments felt heavy, weighted with a strange attention that Emma could not ignore. She tried to respond politely, offering a quiet laugh, changing the subject whenever their remarks lingered too long, but the awkward tension remained, a constant hum in her chest. Daniel, meanwhile, moved around the kitchen without a word, keeping his distance, pretending to focus on coffee, on the newspaper, on anything but the way Emma was struggling to navigate this new closeness from his cousins. The silence between them was louder than any argument could have been, and Emma felt the sting of betrayal, not from action, but from inaction. The way he chose not to see, not to step in, not to speak, it was a quiet cruelty, a gap that widened the moment she realized she had no one to turn to in the room that should have felt safe. She remembered all the small ways Daniel had once shown care, the gentle touches, the quiet reassurances, the way he had always noticed her smallest needs, and now those gestures seemed like memories from a different life, a life where she felt protected, valued, and seen. She wondered how she had missed the change, how she had overlooked the growing distance, and a bitter thought crossed her mind. Had she been pretending too, hoping that silence could somehow protect love? Hours passed, the house moving in slow rhythms, the cousins' chatter like background noise that refused to be ignored. Emma tried to engage, offering a helping hand, carrying dishes, laughing at jokes, but every smile felt forced, every laugh hollow. And she noticed Daniel only in the periphery, scrolling his phone, moving between rooms without ever checking on her, as if the role of protector was optional, as if her unease was insignificant. The thought made her stomach twist, made her heart ache with confusion and disappointment. By midday, Emma felt the emotional weight pressing on her, The way Mark and Lucas lingered in the living room, the way their attention occasionally landed on her, even unintentionally, made her feel exposed, watched, and Daniel's continued silence was unbearable. She tried to speak to him softly, slipping words into the quiet moments when she could be alone with him, asking if he had really been asleep last night, hoping for reassurance, for acknowledgement, for anything that might bridge the gap between them. Daniel avoided her gaze, his responses calm but distant, telling her she was overthinking, assuring her that family would never do anything to hurt her, that she was safe, that everything was fine, but the words rang hollow in Emma's ears, because actions spoke louder than reassurance, and Daniel's choice to ignore what she felt, to pretend not to see the tension in the room, had already spoken louder than any words ever could. She felt herself retreating inside, curling into a small, protective shell around her emotions, wondering how much longer she could endure the quiet neglect. By evening, the cousins were still present, their visit stretching on, and Emma found herself constantly aware of their proximity, the way they moved around the house, the way they laughed too loudly, too closely, the casual ease that felt like it was built on lines she was not allowed to cross. She tried to distract herself by preparing dinner, arranging plates, setting the table, keeping herself busy, anything to avoid the anxious thoughts that threatened to consume her. The quiet gnawing worry that Daniel's silence meant he had already chosen his side. Emma realized she could no longer rely on him, that the comfort of marriage was fragile, built on trust and presence, and when Daniel chose not to act, it left a void that no words could fill. The idea that the man she loved could watch without intervening was terrifying, and she felt a pang of fear for the first time in years, a fear that the foundation of her home might not be as safe as she believed. She wanted to confront him, demand the truth, make him see the danger of indifference, but she hesitated, unsure if confrontation would change anything, unsure if the love she once knew could survive this quiet betrayal. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Daniel's steady breathing beside her a reminder of what she feared, the cousins' voices still echoing faintly in her mind, their laughter haunting, the normal rhythms of home now filled with uncertainty. She turned toward Daniel, wishing for comfort, for protection, for acknowledgement, but he remained still, silent, eyes closed, pretending sleep could erase the tension, pretending sleep could erase the emotional weight pressing on her, and Emma understood that the real hurt was not the behavior of others, but the absence of the person she loved when she needed him most. Tears filled her eyes quietly, not in anger but in grief, grief for a love that seemed to sleep while she was awake, grief for the trust that had been quietly eroded. She realized that this was the turning point, that something fundamental had shifted between them, and while she did not know what the future held, she knew she could not ignore the choice Daniel had made, the choice to pretend not to see, the choice to let others' behavior go unchecked, and in the silence of that night, Emma began to understand that protecting herself might soon become her only option. The next morning, Emma woke with a sense of urgency, the unease from the previous night still clinging to her like a heavy fog. She moved quietly through the house, careful not to wake Daniel, but every sound felt amplified, every movement felt like it carried weight. She glanced at the living room where Mark and Lucas were sipping coffee, talking in low tones, and she noticed the subtle glances they exchanged whenever she walked by, the way their expressions seemed almost secretive, almost conspiratorial, and her chest tightened with a mixture of fear and resolve. She watched Daniel from across the room, his eyes on the newspaper, fingers tapping the page, completely unaware of, or choosing to ignore, the discomfort surrounding them. The realization struck her sharply. This was not about what his cousins were doing. It was about what he was willing to accept, what he was willing to overlook. The silence she had tolerated had allowed tension to grow unchecked, and Emma felt a deep ache for the trust that had been broken. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, knowing she could no longer remain passive. As the day went on, the cousins' presence became heavier, their casual jokes brushing against the lines Emma had silently drawn. and she began to feel a growing sense of strength mixed with fear. She could not change what had happened, but she could decide how she would respond, how she would protect herself. She moved through the house with quiet determination, keeping interactions polite but distant, refusing to let the laughter or lingering attention shake her, every step a small assertion of her own agency. By late afternoon, the weight of tension reached a breaking point. Emma overheard a conversation she had not been meant to hear, Mark teasing Lucas about how easygoing Daniel was, how he preferred to avoid conflict, Lucas laughing and agreeing, mentioning that Daniel always let things slide, never wanted to rock the boat. The words struck Emma like a blow, confirming what she had felt all along, that her husband had chosen silence over protection, that her discomfort had been invisible to him. A truth that cut deeper than any argument could have. Emma felt a mix of anger and sadness, but also clarity. She knew in that moment that her marriage could not continue in the same way, that the love she had cherished required presence, vigilance, and care, none of which had been offered when she needed them most. She packed a small bag in the quiet of the bedroom, every movement deliberate, careful not to create alarm, but filled with the determination that had grown steadily throughout the week. She did not shout, did not cry out, she simply acted, guided by the understanding that self-respect and safety must come first. When Daniel finally noticed, it was subtle, a slight pause in his movements, a faint crease in his forehead. He asked softly where she was going, and Emma, holding her bag, looked directly at him, her voice steady but soft, explaining that she felt alone even when he was physically beside her, that she could no longer tolerate the silence that allowed discomfort to thrive. He opened his mouth to respond, his usual calm faltering, but Emma shook her head, knowing that explanations could no longer undo the absence of care. Daniel's eyes widened, a flash of fear crossing his face. Realizing for the first time the gravity of what his inaction had caused, he stammered, trying to assure her that he never meant harm, that pretending not to see felt easier than confrontation, that he had been afraid of making things worse. But Emma listened without judgment, understanding his fear but recognizing that love required courage, that protection required action, and for her, the absence of that action had become the defining truth of their relationship. She left the house quietly before dawn, the streets of Ohio stretching ahead like a promise, her small bag on the passenger seat, her heart heavy but determined, driving toward her sister's home in Michigan, the road long, the winter light just beginning to touch the horizon, and with every mile, she felt the weight of uncertainty ease slightly, replaced with a growing sense of agency, of self-respect, the knowledge that she had chosen to honor her own heart, to act when silence and passivity threatened her sense of worth. Emma thought about the life she was leaving, the memories of love that had once felt safe, and she felt both grief and relief, grief for what had been lost, relief for the clarity she had gained. The understanding that staying in a home where silence was used as a shield was no longer an option. She reflected on the man she had loved, and realized that love alone was never enough, that it required action, presence, and courage, and when those elements were absent, heartbreak became inevitable. Arriving at her sister's house, Emma was greeted with warmth and concern, questions asked gently, hugs given without judgment, and she felt the first true sense of safety in days. The weight she had carried began to lift, replaced with the quiet understanding that while the past could not be changed, the future remained in her hands. She could rebuild, redefine, and reclaim the love and trust she deserved, even if it meant doing so alone for the time being. That night, as she lay in a bed that was not hers but felt safer than any she had slept in recently, Emma reflected on the lessons of the past days, on the choices that had led to this moment, on the courage it had taken to act quietly but decisively. She understood that love could be beautiful and protective or fragile and passive, and in the quiet of her new surroundings, she promised herself that she would never settle for less than the kind of love that stayed awake, that saw clearly, that acted when it mattered most. Emma knew she had a long journey ahead, not just across miles but across the emotional landscape of trust, forgiveness, and self-discovery. But for the first time in days, she felt a spark of hope, a quiet determination that her life would no longer be defined by inaction or indifference. She could create boundaries, protect her heart, and seek love that honored her presence, her feelings, and her worth. And as sleep finally claimed her, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled not with silence, but with awareness, care, and the courage to act when it mattered most. The night faded into morning, carrying with it the promise of change, the possibility of renewal, and the certainty that Emma had chosen herself, a choice that no one else could make for her, a choice rooted in love, respect, and courage. And in that choice, she found a strength she had not known she possessed, the quiet power to step forward, to reclaim her life, and to trust that the road ahead, though uncertain, was hers to navigate with clarity, purpose, and hope.